Good evening. Tonight we explore the world of Neon Genesis Evangelion, a tale of isolation, broken connections, and the struggle to find meaning in a world perpetually on the brink of annihilation. Let yourself relax as we delve deep into this psychologically complex universe of giant biomechanical entities, mysterious beings known as angels, and the traumatized young pilots forced to save a world that has already ended once before. Before you begin drifting off to sleep, do consider subscribing to the channel for more anime sleep stories. There are many more of your favorite anime worlds to peacefully explore together. And now, on with our story. The world ended in the year 2000. Not with a bang heard across continents, not with the slow decay of civilization, but with an event that would be recorded in history as the second impact. Antarctica, that frozen continent at the bottom of the world, became ground zero for a catastrophe that would reshape humanity forever. The official story, the one told to the public and taught in schools, spoke of a meteorite strike, a celestial body of immense size colliding with the Antarctic ice shelf, triggering tsunamis that swallowed coastlines whole. The Earth's axial tilt shifted. Climate patterns across the globe went haywire. What followed was chaos on a scale humanity had never experienced. Half the human population died in the immediate aftermath. Tsunamis drowned millions. The shifting climate led to crop failures, famine, and resource wars that ignited across every continent. Nuclear weapons were deployed in regional conflicts across the globe. Tokyo, the old capital, was destroyed in the chaos that followed, devastated by conventional warfare and economic collapse. The survivors emerged into a world fundamentally altered, where the old maps meant nothing and the old certainties had dissolved like morning mist. But the official story was a lie. There had been no meteorite. The second impact was caused by human hands, by human ambition, by the discovery of something that should perhaps have remained buried beneath Antarctic ice for all eternity. In the final years of the 20th century, a secretive organization known as SEALA had been quietly accumulating power across the globe. They operated in the shadows of international politics, their influence extending into governments, military organizations, and scientific institutions. SEALA's power derived from their possession of ancient texts known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Not the historical scrolls discovered in caves near Jerusalem, but something far older and stranger, documents that contained prophecies about the nature of humanity, the origins of life on Earth, and the beings that would one day threaten to destroy everything. The Dead Sea Scrolls told of ancient progenitor beings sent across the cosmos by a long-extinct civilization, each carrying the potential to shape the fate of a world. These seeds came in two types. The white seeds, known as fruits of life, would spawn beings of immense physical power. The black seeds, fruits of knowledge, would create beings of high intelligence. According to the ancient texts, these seeds were never meant to propagate the same planet, for if they did, if a forms of existence described in the ancient texts and a paths of understanding hinted at in the scrolls ever merged, the resulting entity would possess godlike power. But something had gone wrong with Earth. Two seeds had arrived. One landed in what would become Antarctica, buried deep in ice, sleeping for millions of years. This was Adam, the white seed, the first angel. The second had crashed into what would later be Japan, creating a massive crater. This was Lilith, the black seed, the second angel. From Lilith came all of human life. Humanity itself, the children of Lilith, sometimes called the Lilin in ancient texts. From Adam would come the other angels, a series of beings of terrifying power who would one day awaken and seek to reclaim Earth from Lilith's children. SEALA discovered Adam first. In the year 2000, an expedition funded secretly by the organization and led by Dr. Katsuragi ventured into the depths of Antarctica. They found the White Moon, a massive chamber buried beneath kilometers of ice. Inside, suspended in stasis, was Adam. Alongside it, they found the Lance of Longinus, a weapon of unknown origin with the power to neutralize an angel's might. The scientists of the Katsuragi expedition made a fatal error. In their attempt to study Adam, to reduce it to an embryonic state that could be controlled and studied, they triggered what would become known as the second impact. Adam's awakening, even partial, released catastrophic amounts of energy. The Lance of Longinus was used to stop the process, to prevent what could have been complete global annihilation, but the damage was done. Antarctica exploded. The tsunamis came. The world changed forever. Among the few survivors at Ground Zero was a young girl named Misato Katsuragi, the daughter of the expedition leader. Her father had saved her life by sealing her in an escape pod, sacrificing himself in the process. She would carry the trauma of that day with her for the rest of her life, a cross-shaped scar on her chest, a permanent reminder of the price paid for humanity's curiosity. In the chaos following second impact, Sela moved quickly. They recovered what remained of Adam, reduced now to an embryonic state. They also salvaged the research data, the information that would prove crucial for what came next. An organization called Gehirn was formed, ostensibly to study the disaster and prevent future catastrophes, but its true purpose was far more specific. Gehirn existed to create weapons capable of fighting the angels, whose arrival the Dead Sea Scrolls had prophesied. The man chosen to lead Gehirn's EVA project was Gendo Ikari, a scientist of considerable brilliance and even more considerable ambition. Gendo was married to Yui Ikari, a biologist whose own research had drawn Seele's attention. Together, they began work on creating the Evangelions, massive biomechanical entities that would serve as humanity's defense against the coming angel threat. But the Evangelions were not simple machines. They could not be mass-produced like tanks or fighter jets. Each EVA required something precious and rare, a human soul. The soul would be housed in the EVA's core, giving the massive entity life and consciousness. The pilots, children who could synchronize their minds with the EVA's nervous system, would control these beings through mental connection alone. The first Evangelion, Unit 00, was constructed using samples derived from Adam. It was a test model, prone to instability, but it proved the concept could work. The second, Unit 01, was different. It was constructed from samples of Lilith, not Adam, making it unique among all the Evangelions. Against protocol, against safety considerations, Yui Ikari volunteered to undergo a contact experiment with Unit 01. The experiment went catastrophically wrong. Yui's body dissolved, absorbed entirely into the EVA's core. Her soul became the living center of Unit 01, trapped forever within the Purple Titan. Gendo witnessed his wife's disappearance. Some would say it broke him. Others would argue it gave him purpose. From that day forward, his every action, every decision, every manipulation would be driven by a single obsessive goal: to reunite with Yui, no matter the cost to the world or to anyone else. The Ikaris had a son. His name was Shinji. He was only 4 years old when his mother vanished. In the aftermath, unable or unwilling to care for the child, Gendo sent Shinji away to live with relatives. For the next 11 years, Shinji Ikari would grow up without parents, without any contact from his father, carrying the weight of abandonment through his childhood. During those years, Gehirn transformed into NERV, a paramilitary organization with authority superseding national governments. NERV's headquarters was built directly over the crater in Japan, where Lilith lay crucified, deep underground in a place called Terminal Dogma. The organization recruited the best minds in the world. Ritsuko Akagi became chief scientist, following in her mother's footsteps. Misato Katsuragi, that survivor of Second Impact, joined as well, rising through the ranks to become the operations director, despite her struggles with trauma and her tendency to mask pain with forced cheerfulness. NERV prepared. They built the fortress city of Tokyo 3, a marvel of engineering designed to be defended against angel attacks. Buildings could retract into the ground. Massive cannons were hidden beneath the streets. The entire city was a weapon, and at its heart, deep below the surface, the Evangelions waited in their cages. The Dead Sea Scrolls had been clear. After Second Impact, the other angels would come. 15 of them, children of Adam, each one unique, each one possessing abilities that defied conventional understanding. They would seek to reach Terminal Dogma, to merge with what they believed was Adam, but was actually Lilith. Such a merger would trigger Third Impact, an apocalypse that would end human civilization and return the planet to Adam's children. Everything NERV did was preparation for that day. The day when the first angel would arrive and the war for humanity's survival would truly begin. 15 years after Second Impact, that day finally came. Shinji Ikari was 15 years old the day his father summoned him. The message was brief, cryptic, containing nothing resembling warmth or familial concern. Just an instruction to come to Tokyo 3, along with train tickets and an address. Shinji stood at the station platform, looking at the message on his portable music player, trying to understand why, after more than a decade of silence, Gendo Ikari had suddenly decided his son was worth acknowledging. Tokyo 3 was under martial law when Shinji arrived. The streets were empty, the population evacuated to underground shelters. An angel was coming. The first one to appear since the Second Impact, 15 years ago. The creature known as Sachiel was making its way across the landscape towards the city, and conventional military forces were attempting, unsuccessfully, to stop it. Shinji stood alone on an empty street, confused and frightened, as fighter jets screamed overhead and explosions echoed across the city. He had no idea what an angel was, no understanding of why he had been summoned, no clue that his life was about to change in ways he could not possibly imagine. A car pulled up beside him. The woman driving it was Misato Katsuragi, though Shinji did not know her name yet. She was supposed to pick him up, to escort him to NERV headquarters, but the angel's unexpected arrival had complicated everything. Misato grabbed Shinji, pulled him into the car, and began driving at reckless speed through the empty city as military ordnance rained down around them. She tried to explain what was happening, but her words barely registered in Shinji's shock. They descended into the geofront, the massive underground cavity beneath Tokyo 3 where NERV headquarters resided. Through kilometers of tunnels, past security checkpoints operating on emergency protocols, into the depths where the city's true purpose was hidden from the world above. Shinji saw his father for the first time in over a decade in the EVA cages, those vast chambers where the Evangelions were stored. Gendo Ikari looked at his son with cold appraisal, not recognition or affection. He did not ask how Shinji had been, did not apologize for the abandonment. Instead, he stated simply that Shinji would pilot Evangelion Unit 01. Now. Immediately. Despite having no training, no preparation, no understanding of what an Evangelion even was. Shinji refused. Of course he refused. He was a traumatized, lonely 15-year-old being asked to climb into a giant biomechanical horror and fight a monster. The EVA itself was terrifying to look at, bound in restraints, towering into the darkness above, its single visible eye glowing with an unsettling awareness. Then Gendo had a stretcher brought in. On it lay Rei Ayanami, the designated pilot for Unit 01. She was Shinji's age, bandaged heavily from previous injuries sustained in a test. She could barely move, but she tried to rise, tried to make her way to the entry plug despite her injuries, because Gendo Ikari had ordered it, and Rei existed to follow Gendo's orders. Watching this injured girl try to pilot in his place broke something in Shinji. He agreed, not because he wanted to, not because he felt capable, but because he could not bear the thought of letting someone else suffer in his stead. It was characteristic of who Shinji Ikari was at his core, someone who chose action not out of heroism, but out of a desperate need to avoid causing others pain, even at tremendous cost to himself. They loaded Shinji into the entry plug, that cylindrical cockpit that would be inserted into the EVA's spine. The plug filled with LCL, a breathable liquid that would interface with Shinji's nervous system and allow synchronization with the EVA. Shinji panicked, thinking he would drown, but his lungs adapted. The sensory connections established. He could feel the EVA. It was not a machine. It was alive, and its sensations were becoming his sensations. The EVA was launched to the surface to face Sachiel, the third angel. Shinji had no training, no instruction, no idea what he was doing. The angel, a massive humanoid figure with a bird-like mask and the ability to generate devastating energy blasts, attacked immediately. Unit 01 took a step, stumbled, fell. The EVA could not walk properly because Shinji did not know how to walk in it. The angel loomed over them, raised its arm, and struck down with tremendous force. Unit 01's head was crushed. The armor crumpled. Organic tissue was exposed beneath the metal plating, bleeding. Shinji felt it all through the neural connection. The pain was overwhelming, beyond anything he had experienced. He screamed. Consciousness began to slip away. But Unit 01 did not stop. The Eva's eyes glowed with a different light. Its movements changed, becoming fluid and purposeful where before they had been clumsy. Unit 01 was moving on its own, the soul within its core taking control. Yui Ikari, protecting her son the only way she still could. The Eva attacked Sachiel with savage ferocity, tearing into the angel with bare hands, ripping away its core, destroying it in a display of violence that shocked everyone watching from NERV headquarters. When Shinji regained consciousness, he was in a hospital bed. Days had passed. The battle was a blur of pain and terror. Misato came to see him, explained what had happened, offered him a place to live since he could not very well go back to his relatives after what he had experienced. She did not explicitly say he had to keep piloting, but the implication was clear. The angels would keep coming. NERV needed pilots. Shinji was one of only a handful of people capable of synchronizing with an Eva. So began Shinji Ikari's life in Tokyo 3. He moved into Misato's apartment, a surprisingly messy and chaotic space, given that Misato was a high-ranking NERV officer. She lived alone, except for her pet penguin, Pen, a warm-water penguin she had acquired through circumstances she never fully explained. Misato tried to be supportive, tried to help Shinji adjust, but she was battling her own demons and was not necessarily equipped to help a traumatized teenager navigate the horror of being an Eva pilot. Shinji enrolled in school, a bizarre semblance of normal life in a city built to be a fortress. His classmates included Toji Suzuhara and Kensuke Ida, two boys his age, who had very different reactions to learning. Shinji was an Eva pilot. Toji's sister had been injured during the battle with Sachiel, hurt by falling debris as Unit 01 stumbled through the city, and Toji blamed Shinji for the harm done to civilians. Kensuke, conversely, was fascinated by the Evas and peppered Shinji with questions the pilot could not answer. The second angel, Shamshel, arrived not long after. This time, Shinji had some training. He knew how to move in the Eva, how to use its weapons. Unit 01 was deployed with a progressive knife, a blade that vibrated at high frequency to cut through an angel's AT field, that barrier of absolute territory that protected each angel from conventional weapons. The battle went better initially. Shinji managed to sever Shamshel's tentacle-like appendages, weapons that could slice through buildings like paper. But then Shamshel wrapped its remaining tentacles around Unit 01, crushing it, and Shinji panicked. In desperation, he drove the progressive knife into Shamshel's core, stabbing repeatedly even after the angel had stopped moving, traumatized by the act of killing and unable to stop himself. After that battle, Shinji ran away. He left Tokyo 3, took a train to nowhere in particular, trying to escape the horror of what he had become. A weapon. A killer. His father's tool. Misato found him eventually, tracked him down, and they had a conversation that was simultaneously gentle and harsh. She did not order him back. She gave him a choice, explained that he could leave if he wanted, but asked him to understand what that choice would mean. Who would pilot if he left? Rei, injured and barely functional. Some other unprepared child dragged into service? Shinji chose to return. Not because the situation had changed, not because he suddenly felt capable or heroic, but because running away solved nothing. The angels would keep coming. People would keep dying. If he had the ability to pilot, to fight, then walking away meant choosing to let others suffer. It was a terrible reason to return, rooted in guilt rather than conviction, but it was enough to bring him back to Tokyo 3. His relationship with his father remained cold, virtually non-existent. Gendo barely acknowledged Shinji's presence, except when issuing orders. The commander of NERV had no interest in being a father. He wanted a pilot, a functional component in his larger plan, and Shinji fulfilled that role adequately. Nothing more was required. But Shinji did develop other relationships. Rei Ayanami was an enigma, a girl who seemed almost ghost-like in her detachment from normal human interaction. She lived alone in a decrepit apartment, took medication for purposes never explained, and existed seemingly for the sole purpose of following Gendo Ikari's orders. When Shinji tried to befriend her, tried to understand her, Rei reacted with confusion, as if kindness was a foreign concept she had no framework for processing. Still, slowly, something changed in Rei. When Shinji gave her a new ID card after hers was damaged, when he smiled at her without expecting anything in return, Rei experienced something she had never felt before. Warmth, perhaps. A connection, fragile and tentative, to another person. She did not understand it, but she knew it was important. The third angel, Ramiel, presented a new kind of challenge. This one was geometrical, a massive floating octahedron that could fire particle beams of devastating power. It began drilling into the geofront, attempting to reach terminal dogma where Lilith waited. Conventional tactics were useless. NERV devised a plan to use a prototype positron rifle, a weapon that could theoretically penetrate Ramiel's AT field if given enough power. They would channel the entire electrical output of Japan through the weapon, giving Unit 01 one shot to destroy the Angel before it could fire back. Rei would pilot Unit 00 as a shield, protecting Shinji during the charging period. It was the first time the two pilots worked together, relying on each other for survival. When Ramiel fired at Unit 01, Rei threw Unit 0 in the way, taking the full force of the blast to protect Shinji. The EVA was nearly destroyed, its armor melting away, and Rei inside was subjected to tremendous heat and pain. After the battle, after Shinji had fired the positron rifle and destroyed Ramiel, he ran to Unit 00's entry plug and manually opened it, desperate to see if Rei was alive. She emerged from the superheated LCL, barely conscious, and saw Shinji's tears, his genuine concern for her well-being. She smiled. A real, unforced smile. For perhaps the first time in her life, Rei Ayanami felt something resembling happiness. The victory against Ramiel had come at tremendous cost, requiring all of Japan's electrical power and putting both pilots at risk. NERV's monopoly on anti-A-Angel defense was complete, but that monopoly bred resentment in certain quarters. The Japanese government and private industry had been effectively shut out of humanity's defense, reduced to spectators watching an organization with international authority operate with impunity on their soil. A private corporation called Japan Heavy Chemical Industries attempted to challenge NERV's dominance. They developed Jet Alone, an unmanned battle robot designed to fight angels without requiring child pilots or the mysterious and unreliable Evangelions. The machine was conventional technology, nuclear-powered, remotely controlled. No souls, no synchronization, no child soldiers. On paper, it represented everything NERV's EVAs were not: safe, predictable, under governmental control, rather than beholden to shadowy international organizations. NERV was invited to attend Jet Alone's public demonstration, a thinly veiled challenge to their authority. Misato and Ritsuko attended, along with Shinji. The event was meant to showcase Jet Alone's capabilities, to prove that conventional technology could match the Evangelions. But the demonstration went catastrophically wrong. Jet Alone's control systems malfunctioned. The nuclear reactor began overheating, heading towards meltdown. The unmanned robot, now uncontrollable, walked toward a populated area with a nuclear bomb in its chest. NERV scrambled to respond. Misato made the decision to have Shinji deploy Unit 01, but she went further. She climbed onto Jet Alone herself while it was still active, risking tremendous danger to manually input an emergency shutdown code into the robot's systems. It was reckless, driven by her need to prove NERV's competence and to prevent a nuclear disaster. But it worked. Jet Alone was shut down, the crisis averted. The incident reinforced NERV's position. No conventional weapon could match the Evangelions. The political challenges faded, at least temporarily, but for those paying attention, the malfunction seemed suspicious. Ritsuko's assessment suggested sabotage, that NERV itself might have ensured Jet Alone's failure to eliminate a potential competitor. It was the kind of ruthless calculation that characterized how NERV operated, crushing any threat to their monopoly on power. Between angel attacks, life in Tokyo 3 developed its own strange rhythms. Shinji continued attending school, where his status as an EVA pilot made him simultaneously famous and isolated. His classmates knew what he did, but could not truly understand it. The gap between his experiences and theirs was unbridgeable. He tried to maintain friendships with Toji and Kensuke, tried to participate in normal teenage activities, but there was always an awareness that his life was fundamentally different from everyone else's. Rei remained an enigma. She attended school but participated minimally in social activities. She took medication that was never explained, lived alone in an apartment that was barely habitable, existing in a state of isolation so profound it seemed almost inhuman. When Shinji tried to visit her apartment, he found it decrepit, barely furnished, medicine bottles, the only sign that anyone actually lived there. Rei seemed confused by his visit, as if the concept of a social call was foreign to her understanding of how people interacted. Yet something was changing in Rei. The connection with Shinji, fragile as it was, had planted seeds of self-awareness. She began questioning things she had never questioned before. Why did she pilot? What did she want for herself? These questions had no easy answers for someone who had been created rather than born, who existed primarily as a tool for Gendo Ikari's plans. One of the later angels to attack after Shinji's arrival was Matarail, a creature that approached Tokyo 3 during a power outage that had shut down NERV's headquarters. The timing was unfortunate. The Evangelions required external power from their umbilical cables, and with the facility running on emergency backup generators, deploying the EVAs was complicated. The pilots found themselves trapped in an elevator when the power failed, stuck between floors in darkness. The enforced proximity in the elevator gave Shinji, Rei, and Asuka time to talk, though mostly it was uncomfortable silence punctuated by Asuka's complaints. They were eventually rescued and the EVAs deployed, but the battle against Matarail was complicated by the power limitations. The angel itself was unusual, a massive arachnid-like entity that secreted an extremely corrosive acid. It walked across Tokyo 3 on long spindly legs, dripping acid that melted through the city's armor plating, attempting to burn through to the geofront below. The three EVAs engaged Matarail in coordination, limited by their internal battery's 5-minute operational window. They could not afford extended combat. The Angel's acid had already breached the outer defenses of NERV headquarters, dripping into the geofront, threatening to dissolve the armor protecting the command center. The pilots attacked simultaneously, targeting Matarail's core with concentrated fire. The Angel fell, its massive body collapsing onto Tokyo 3's streets, acid continuing to eat through everything it touched, even in death. Each angel presented unique challenges. Sahakiel, the 10th angel, was perhaps one of the most terrifying in its approach. It appeared in low Earth orbit, a massive entity that could manipulate its own AT field to levitate and drop portions of itself as kinetic bombardment weapons. It rained destruction on NERV from space, each dropped piece accelerating to tremendous velocity before impact. NERV tracked Sahakiel's trajectory and calculated that it intended to drop its entire mass directly onto NERV headquarters. The impact would be extinction level, a meteor strike that would obliterate Tokyo 3 and everyone in it. Conventional weapons were useless. They could not reach it, and even if they could, destroying it in orbit would not prevent the pieces from falling. The strategy Misato devised was desperate. All three Evangelions would deploy simultaneously at the calculated impact point. They would combine their AT fields, creating a barrier strong enough to catch Sahakiel as it fell, then destroy its core before the Angel could recover. It required perfect timing and synchronization. The pilots would be directly beneath a falling mountain of Angel flesh, trusting their AT fields to prevent them from being crushed. The plan worked. Barely. Sahakiel fell, its massive body descending through the atmosphere. The three EVAs caught it, their combined AT fields straining under the tremendous weight and impact force. For a few terrifying seconds, it seemed the barrier might fail, that the Angel's mass would crush through and obliterate them all. But the fields held, and in the moment of contact, all three EVAs struck simultaneously, driving their progressive weapons into Sahakiel's core. The Angel died mid-fall, its body dissolving before impact, leaving the three Evangelions standing beneath falling droplets of angel blood. Throughout these battles, there was another presence moving through Tokyo 3, someone with his own agenda. Ryoji Kaji was ostensibly an inspector sent by Sealer to oversee NERV's operations. He was charming, casual, seemingly unserious in his approach to his duties. He grew watermelons on NERV headquarters' roof. He flirted with Misato, his former lover, attempting to rekindle a relationship that had ended years earlier. He seemed more interested in leisure than in actually inspecting anything. But Kaji was far more than he appeared. He was a triple agent, playing Seal against NERV against the Japanese government, pursuing his own investigation into the truth behind Second Impact, the Evangelions, and the various organizations' real goals. He asked questions that made people uncomfortable. He accessed restricted areas. He built a picture of conspiracy and manipulation that went far deeper than anyone publicly acknowledged. Kaji discovered Adam, or what remained of it, the embryonic entity grafted onto Gendo Ikari's hand, the first angel reduced to something small enough to hide. He learned about the Human Instrumentality Project, about Seal's true goals. He discovered that Second Impact had not been a natural disaster, but a controlled experiment that had gone catastrophically wrong. Every piece of information he gathered painted a picture of organizations using humanity as pawns in conflicts over godlike power. He shared some of what he learned with Misato, trying to protect her by giving her information that might help her survive what was coming. He told her about Lilith in Terminal Dogma, about the truth of the Evangelions, about how thoroughly everyone was being manipulated. Misato listened, terrified by the implications, but unable to walk away from her responsibilities to the pilots or to NERV. Kaji's investigation eventually attracted the wrong kind of attention. Someone decided he knew too much, that he had become a liability. He was executed in the corridors of NERV headquarters, shot from behind, killed quietly, and disposed of without ceremony. The message was clear. Asking too many questions was fatal. Sealy tolerated no threats to their plans, and Kaji had made himself a threat by refusing to remain ignorant. Misato discovered his death and was devastated. Kaji had been many things to her: lover, friend, confidant, someone who understood the corruption they were all swimming in. His death was another reminder that NERV was not a heroic organization defending humanity, but something far more morally compromised, pursuing goals that required ruthless elimination of anyone who might expose the truth. The angels kept coming, each one different, each one forcing the pilots to adapt. Some attacks were straightforward combat, others were psychological, targeting the pilots' minds rather than their bodies. The strain accumulated. Shinji's mental state remained fragile, his sense of self-worth entirely dependent on external validation that rarely came. Rei continued her slow emergence into something resembling personhood, questioning her existence and purpose. Asuka maintained her facade of confidence, but cracks were appearing, her desperate need to be the best pilot showing signs of pathology rather than healthy pride. NERV's response to the pilot's deteriorating mental health was to conduct more tests, gather more data, optimize their performance as weapons. There were no therapists, no counseling, no recognition that using children as soldiers was fundamentally traumatic, regardless of how necessary it might be. The organization treated the pilots as equipment that needed maintenance, not as people who needed care. Behind the scenes, darker projects were underway. Ritsuko Akagi, chief scientist and daughter of NERV's previous chief scientist, was developing the dummy plug system. This technology would allow Evangelions to operate without pilots, using artificial personalities based on Rei Ayanami's pattern. It was meant as a backup, a way to deploy EVAs if pilots were unavailable or unwilling to fight. But the dummy plug system was also an admission that the pilots were expendable. If EVAs could operate without them, then the children became less necessary, less valuable. It was another reminder that NERV viewed everyone as tools, components that could be replaced if they stopped functioning adequately. The development of the dummy plugs required extensive data from Rei, scans, psychological profiles, personality mapping. Rei submitted to it all without question. as she submitted to everything Gendo Ikari asked of her. She did not understand that she was providing the template for her own replacement, that NERV was creating artificial copies of her mind to use as disposable pilot substitutes. In Terminal Dogma, the Ray clones floated in their tanks, dozens of identical bodies waiting to be activated. Each was a potential replacement, a backup copy to deploy if the current Ray was killed or proved insufficient. They were the physical manifestation of how NERV viewed people, as resources to be manufactured, deployed, and replaced as needed. Ritsuko knew about the clones. She had helped create them, following in her mother's footsteps, continuing work that had begun before she joined NERV. She understood what they represented: the reduction of human beings to reproducible patterns, the elimination of individual uniqueness in favor of fungible copies. It was something that troubled her, though not enough to make her stop her work. The relationship between Ritsuko and Gendo was complicated and deeply unhealthy. She had fallen into the same pattern as her mother before her, loving a man who was incapable of loving anyone except his dead wife. Gendo used Ritsuko's affection without reciprocating, kept her close because she was useful, because her brilliant mind and willingness to do morally questionable work made her valuable to his plans. Ritsuko knew she was being used. She had watched her mother follow the same pattern, falling in love with Gendo and being discarded when no longer useful. Yet she repeated the cycle anyway, trapped by her own need for recognition and affection from someone fundamentally incapable of providing either. It was a form of self-destruction, a slow erosion of her own dignity and self-worth in service to someone who would never value her as anything more than a useful tool. The pilots remained largely unaware of these deeper currents. They fought angels, attended school, struggled with their own trauma, and tried to maintain some semblance of normal life between battles. They did not know about the Ray clones, about the dummy plug system, about Kaji's investigation or his eventual murder. They existed in a bubble of partial truth, told only what NERV decided they needed to know to function as weapons. Asuka, in particular, was struggling with the weight of her own history. Her mother's suicide haunted her, though she refused to acknowledge it consciously. She had built her entire personality as a defense against that trauma, creating a persona so aggressively confident that vulnerability could never surface. Being the best pilot, achieving the highest synchronization scores, earning praise and recognition, these were not goals but desperate needs, attempts to prove her worth in the absence of the maternal love she had lost. When her synchronization scores began to decline, when Shinji's scores started approaching and then matching hers, Asuka's entire psychological structure came under threat. If she was not the best, then what was she? The question terrified her because she had no answer that did not involve confronting the trauma she had spent years avoiding. Her value as a pilot was the only value she recognized in herself, and watching it slip away felt like dying by degrees. These were the dynamics in play as the series moved toward its climax. Children being traumatized repeatedly, adults pursuing agendas that required those children suffering, organizations manipulating everyone toward apocalyptic goals. The angels were the external threat, but the real damage was being done by humans to humans, by systems that treated people as expendable resources in pursuit of power and control. This was the pattern that established itself over the following weeks. Angels arrived, each one different from the last. There was Gagiel, a massive aquatic angel that attacked a naval fleet transporting Unit 02 and its pilot to Japan. There was Israfel, an angel that could split into two separate entities, requiring Unit 01 and Unit 2 to fight in perfect synchronization. There was Sandalphon, found in a volcano, battling Unit 02 in extreme heat and pressure. Each battle brought new horrors, new trauma, new reasons for Shinji to question why he continued this existence. The battles were not simply physical confrontations. Each angel attack represented a different form of existential threat, a different challenge to humanity's continued existence. The variety in angel forms and abilities suggested intelligence behind their attacks, adaptation, and learning from previous encounters. NERV scientists struggled to understand the angels' ultimate goal beyond the obvious objective of reaching terminal dogma. Some angels seemed almost exploratory in their approach, as if attempting to understand humanity rather than simply destroy it. Others were purely destructive, singularly focused on breaching NERV's defenses and reaching Lilith. The diversity suggested that angels, despite being classified as a single category of threat, possessed individual consciousness and potentially individual motives. The pilots discussed these matters sometimes, in quiet moments between battles. Shinji wondered whether the angels felt pain, whether they experienced fear in their final moments as their cores were destroyed. Rei suggested that angels were simply following their nature, doing what they were created to do, just as the Evangelions followed their programming. Asuka dismissed such philosophical concerns as pointless, arguing that it did not matter what angels felt or wanted because they were trying to destroy humanity and had to be stopped. These different perspectives reflected the pilot's psychological states. Shinji's empathy extended even to enemies, his tendency to see suffering in everything reflecting his own internal pain. Rei's detachment allowed her to conceptualize angels as merely fulfilling programmed functions, much as she viewed herself. Asuka's aggressive certainty provided a defense against doubt, allowing her to kill without hesitation or regret, because acknowledging complexity might undermine her confidence. School provided its own challenges and occasional moments of normalcy. There were school festivals, where Shinji was volunteered to participate in activities he had no interest in. There were classmates who viewed him with a mixture of awe and incomprehension, aware that he piloted giant robots, but unable to connect that knowledge with the quiet, withdrawn boy who sat in their classroom. Toji and Kensuke remained Shinji's closest friends, though the friendship was complicated by the gulf between their experiences. They tried to understand what piloting was like, asked questions that Shinji could not answer because the truth was both too traumatic and too alien to convey. How could he explain synchronizing with an Evangelion, feeling its pain as his own pain, experiencing death and regeneration, killing creatures that might be intelligent and afraid? The friendship persisted despite these barriers, providing Shinji with connections to normal human life that were increasingly rare. Toji and Kensuke represented the world Shinji might have inhabited if circumstances had been different, if his father had not summoned him to Tokyo 3, if there had been no angels and no Evangelions. Their presence was simultaneously comforting and painful, a reminder of normalcy that would never be possible for him. Rei's social isolation was more profound than Shinji's. She had no friends beyond the tentative connection with Shinji himself. Other students found her unsettling, off-putting, in ways they could not articulate. She did not participate in social activities, did not engage in the typical interactions that build relationships. She existed at school like a ghost, present but not truly part of the social ecosystem. The relationship between Rei and Gendo was particularly troubling to those who observed it closely. Ritsuko watched Rei defer to Gendo with absolute obedience, saw the girl's entire existence seemingly devoted to gaining his approval. It mirrored Ritsuko's own relationship with Gendo in uncomfortable ways, highlighting patterns of dependence and manipulation that ran through NERV's personal relationships like poison. Gendo kept Rei close, took an interest in her well-being that seemed out of character for someone so emotionally distant. The reason for this preferential treatment was complicated, rooted in Rei's nature as a clone of Yui, as a being created to serve specific purposes in Gendo's plan for instrumentality. He needed Rei, needed her loyalty and obedience, and he cultivated her dependence on him to ensure she would perform her role when the time came. Rei sensed that things were being withheld from her, though she lacked the context to understand what they were. There were gaps in her awareness, absences she could feel, but not name. She moved through her days knowing she occupied a role she had not chosen, following instructions without being told why they mattered. Whatever truths existed beyond that remained out of reach, held somewhere above her, revealed only to those who decided what she was allowed to know. The testing continued quietly, becoming part of Ray's routine. She sat where she was told, remained still for long periods, and followed instructions without question. The rooms were cold and brightly lit, the machines close enough to feel their presence even when they made no sound. Whatever was being taken from her happened gradually, without pain or resistance, unnoticed in the moment. She did not know she was leaving pieces of herself behind, only that each session ended with a sense of emptiness she could not explain. When Shinji learned about the dummy plug system later, learned that NERV was creating artificial copies of Ray's mind, he was horrified in ways he could not fully articulate. The idea of someone being reduced to data, to a pattern that could be copied and reproduced, felt like a fundamental violation. It reinforced his understanding that NERV viewed people as resources rather than as individuals, deserving respect and dignity. The strain of repeated battles accumulated in different ways for each pilot. Shinji became increasingly withdrawn, his already fragile mental state deteriorating under the weight of repeated trauma. Each battle left psychological scars that never healed, building layers of damage that made functioning more difficult with each passing engagement. Ray's emotional development continued in unexpected ways. The changes were subtle, barely noticeable to outside observers, but significant for someone who had started from such profound emotional blankness. She began experiencing moods, preferences, desires. Nothing dramatic, just small hints that she was becoming something more than the empty vessel she had been designed to be. Asuka's decline was more obvious and more troubling. Her synchronization scores, once the highest among all pilots, began dropping without clear explanation. The decrease was gradual at first, barely noticeable, but it continued consistently, suggesting something fundamentally wrong with her connection to Unit 02. NERV's tests found no physical cause, suggesting the problem was psychological, that Asuka's mental state was affecting her ability to pilot. Asuka felt the change before anyone said it out loud. Something in the Eva no longer responded the way it once had. Movements that had felt effortless now required concentration. The numbers on the screen confirmed what she already sensed, but it was the feeling that unsettled her most, the sense that something essential was slipping, quietly, without warning. She pushed harder, trained longer, refused rest, as if effort alone could force things back into place. But the more she strained to reclaim what she had been, the more distant it seemed to become. The pilots' relationships with each other grew more complex and strained as time passed. Shinji and Asuka lived together in Misato's apartment, creating an intimacy of proximity that neither was equipped to handle healthily. They saw each other at their worst, in moments of vulnerability and weakness that neither wanted witnessed. They hurt each other through careless words and deliberate cruelty, each carrying their own trauma and unable to respond to the other's pain with anything resembling compassion or understanding. Yet there were also moments of connection, brief and fragile, when their guards dropped and something genuine passed between them. Moments when Asuka would fall asleep, waiting for something, and look vulnerable rather than fierce. When her desperate need for recognition became visible beneath the aggressive confidence. Moments when Shinji would show unexpected courage or competence, revealing glimpses of the person he might become if not crushed under the weight of his circumstances. These moments never led anywhere, never developed into genuine connection, because neither pilot knew how to bridge the gap between them. They were too damaged, too defended, too terrified of the vulnerability that real connection required. So they remained locked in patterns of approach and retreat, hurting each other and themselves, unable to break free from cycles established by their respective traumas. The world outside Tokyo 3 continued its slow recovery from Second Impact, though recovery was perhaps too optimistic a term. Civilization rebuilt itself, but into something diminished, scarred, fundamentally altered from what had existed before. The survivors carried trauma that manifested in various social pathologies, increased militarism, political instability, economic dysfunction. Humanity had survived but had not healed, and perhaps never would. NERV and Seele pursued their agendas against this backdrop of collective trauma. manipulating events toward their respective visions of humanity's future. Seeley sought instrumentality as solution to human suffering, believing that merging all consciousness would eliminate the conflicts and pain that made individual existence so difficult. Gendo sought instrumentality as means to personal reunion, caring nothing for Seeley's utopian justifications and everything for his own desperate need to escape the loss of Yui. Neither agenda considered the pilot's well-being or the ethical implications of using children as weapons. Both organizations viewed the pilots as necessary tools, components in plans that would ultimately render them irrelevant. The children's suffering was regrettable perhaps, but ultimately acceptable as means to larger ends. But between battles, life in Tokyo 3 continued with bizarre normalcy. Shinji attended school, made friends with Toji and Kensuke despite their rocky start, learned to play the cello. Misato tried to create something resembling a functional home life, though her cooking was notoriously terrible and her organization skills non-existent. These moments of ordinary existence created a strange rhythm, a life that oscillated between the mundane tedium of being a teenager and the existential terror of fighting monsters that could end human civilization. NERV itself was a place of secrets. Shinji and the other pilots existed in a bubble of partial truth, told only what they needed to know to function as weapons. They did not know about Seal, about the Dead Sea Scrolls, about the true nature of the Evangelions, or the purpose behind the Human Instrumentality Project. They were children being used by adults pursuing agendas far beyond their understanding. In the deeper levels of NERV, things were happening that the pilots never saw. Gendo Ikari met regularly with Seal's council, those shadowy figures who appeared only as monoliths marked with mysterious symbols. They discussed the Dead Sea Scrolls prophecies, debated the proper timing for instrumentality, manipulated events towards ends only they understood. Gendo played along with Seal's plans while secretly pursuing his own path, his own method of using the coming third impact to achieve what he truly wanted, reunion with Yui. Ritsuko Akagi worked in her laboratories, developing the dummy plug system that would allow EVAs to operate without human pilots, using data derived from Rei Ayanami's personality patterns. She knew secrets that would horrify the pilots if revealed. She understood what Rei truly was, the nature of her creation, the purpose behind the countless identical bodies floating in LCL tanks deep beneath NERV headquarters. And in the darkest depths of Terminal Dogma, Lilith remained crucified on a massive cross, the lance of Longinus piercing its chest, holding it in stasis. The mask on Lilith's face bore Seal's symbol, hiding the truth of its identity. For years, everyone at NERV believed they were guarding Adam, never realizing that Adam existed only as an embryo grafted onto Gendo's hand, that the massive entity in Terminal Dogma was something far more significant to humanity's existence. The angels kept coming, each battle leaving its scars on the pilots' psyches. And waiting in the future, unknowable but inevitable, was the arrival of the final angel, the one that would force Shinji Ikari to make choices no 15-year-old should ever have to face. The arrival of Asuka Langley Soryu changed the dynamic at NERV considerably. She came from Germany, where she had been training as an EVA pilot for years, and she arrived with Unit 02, the first production model Evangelion, painted in striking crimson. Asuka was everything Shinji was not: confident, aggressive, outspoken, proud of her abilities as a pilot. Where Shinji stumbled through battles plagued by self-doubt, Asuka threw herself into combat with enthusiasm, bordering on recklessness. She was brilliant, genuinely talented, with synchronization scores that exceeded both Shinji and Rei in the early days. She spoke multiple languages fluently. She had graduated from university at age 14. By any objective measure, Asuka Langley Soryu was exceptional, and she made certain everyone around her knew it. Her ego was massive, her need for validation even larger, though the reasons for that need were buried deep beneath layers of manufactured confidence. Asuka's backstory, when it eventually came to light, explained much about her desperate pursuit of excellence and recognition. Her mother, Kyoko Zeppelin Soryu, had been a brilliant scientist working on the Evangelion project in Germany. she was selected to undergo a contact experiment with Unit 02, similar to Yui Ikari's experiment with Unit 01. The experiment went wrong in ways different from Yui's complete absorption. Kyoko's soul was only partially absorbed into Unit 02's core, leaving behind a damaged shell of a person, mentally broken and unable to recognize her own daughter. Young Asuka had tried desperately to gain her mother's attention, her recognition, her love. She would show Kyoko her accomplishments, her test scores, her achievements, trying to be exceptional enough that her mother would see her. But Kyoko, in her damaged state, could only see a doll she carried with her, believing the doll was her real daughter, and treating the actual Asuka as a stranger, an intruder, someone to be avoided. By this point, the effort had exhausted her. The persona she had maintained for so long no longer felt solid enough to hold. Achievements that once defined her seemed distant and irrelevant, stripped of the meaning she had relied on. What remained was not confidence or pride, but fatigue, the sense of having pushed herself as far as she could without finding what she had been seeking. For the first time, the certainty she had built her life around offered no protection at all. But the foundation was rotten. No amount of achievement could fill the void left by maternal rejection. Asuka's confidence was not genuine self-assurance, but desperate compensation, a facade covering profound insecurity. When her piloting performance began to decline, when her synchronization scores dropped, the facade began crumbling because it had no solid foundation to sustain it. The realization that her mother's soul was in Unit 02 came late, too late to prevent Asuka's complete psychological collapse. When she finally understood, when she felt her mother's presence during that final battle against the mass production Evangelions, it brought momentary peace. For those brief minutes of perfect synchronization, fighting alongside her mother's soul, Asuka experienced the connection she had been denied throughout her childhood. But that connection came just before annihilation, a cruel gift offered only to be taken away. Shinji's relationship with music provided one of his few genuine solaces. He played the cello, practicing alone in his room at Misato's apartment, losing himself in the mathematical precision and emotional resonance of classical pieces. Music required focus and discipline, but rewarded it with something beautiful, with creation rather than destruction. In a life defined by piloting weapons and killing angels, the cello represented his only creative outlet, his only means of expression that did not involve violence. The music also connected him to his mother in ways he did not fully understand. Yui had played piano, had exposed young Shinji to classical music before her disappearance. When he played, he was continuing something she had started, maintaining a connection to the mother he barely remembered. It was one of the few positive inheritances he had received. One of the few things about his childhood that was not defined entirely by abandonment and loss. Misato's relationship with alcohol worsened throughout this period, her drinking becoming less social and more medicinal. She used alcohol to numb the trauma of second impact, to dull the memories of her father's death, to make bearable the weight of sending children into battle repeatedly. She maintained her cheerful persona during the day, but at night, alone in her apartment, the mask came off and the pain underneath became visible. Her relationship with Kaji had been an attempt to recapture something from before second impact, from before the trauma that had defined her adult life. Kaji had known her when she was younger, before she had built her defenses, and being with him allowed her to pretend temporarily that she was still that person. His death shattered that illusion, forced her to confront the reality that she had changed fundamentally, that the trauma had made her into someone different from who she had been. Misato tried to be a parental figure for Shinji and Asuka, tried to create something resembling a functional household, but she was too damaged herself to provide the kind of stable support they needed. She meant well, genuinely cared about the pilots, but caring was not enough when she lacked the emotional resources to help them process their own trauma. She was herself a traumatized child in an adult body, trying to parent other traumatized children while never having addressed her own unhealed wounds. The organization NERV itself was structured to prevent genuine human connection. Compartmentalization meant that different departments knew only what was necessary for their specific functions. Scientists did not know the full scope of Seele's plans. Military personnel did not understand the true nature of the Evangelions. Even high-ranking officers like Misato operated with incomplete information, knowing enough to perform their duties, but not enough to understand the larger picture. This compartmentalization was intentional, designed to prevent anyone from having sufficient information to effectively oppose Seele's agenda. It also prevented the kind of collective moral reckoning that might occur if everyone understood the full implications of what they were doing. People could rationalize their participation by focusing on their specific duties, on the immediate necessities of defending against angels, without confronting the larger ethical questions about using child soldiers or manipulating humanity toward engineered apocalypse. Gendo Ikari exemplified the moral bankruptcy at NERV's heart. He was brilliant, capable, utterly ruthless in pursuit of his goals. He manipulated everyone around him, viewing them as pieces to be moved on a board, tools to be used and discarded as necessary. His subordinates respected and feared him, but no one except perhaps Rei genuinely cared about him as a person, and even Rei's attachment was more programming than genuine affection. The relationship between Go and his son was the clearest evidence of his emotional damage. He could not look at Shinji without seeing Yui, without being reminded of his loss, and the pain of that reminder made genuine connection impossible. He sent Shinji away as a child, not because he did not love him, but because he could not bear to be reminded constantly of what he had lost. By the time he summoned Shinji back to Tokyo 3, the gap between them had become unbridgeable. Years of abandonment, creating wounds that no apology or explanation could heal. Throughout all of this, the Angels continued their assault, each attack bringing Tokyo 3 closer to the final confrontation that would determine humanity's fate. NERV prepared, refined their tactics, optimized the Evangelions' performance, but they were ultimately preparing for a conclusion whose true nature they did not understand. Seele had plans within plans, agendas that went beyond simply defeating the Angels, and when the final battles came, the real conflict would not be between humanity and angels, but between different visions of what humanity should become. The creature was aquatic, massive and serpentine, capable of moving through water at tremendous speed. It targeted the carrier ship where Unit 02 was stored, attempting to destroy the EVA before it could be deployed. Misato, who was aboard the fleet along with Shinji, had to devise a strategy on the fly. They would deploy Unit 02 from inside the carrier, use the Angel's own aggression against it. Asuka would pilot with Shinji as her backup, both of them sharing the entry plug in an unprecedented tandem operation. It was chaotic, improvised, and Asuka dominated the entire process with her forceful personality, barely acknowledging Shinji except to bark orders at him. The plan worked. Unit 02 opened the Angel's mouth from within, allowing the naval fleet to fire all their weapons directly into its exposed core. Gagiel was destroyed, and Asuka's arrival in Tokyo 3 was marked by victory. She moved into Misato's apartment, taking over Shinji's room and relegating him to sleeping in the main area, establishing a household dynamic that would become increasingly strained as time went on. Living with Asuka was challenging. She was loud, demanding, dismissive of Shinji's contributions, and engaged in constant psychological warfare to establish her superiority. She called him names, mocked his hesitance in battle, made it clear she viewed him as inferior in every measurable way. For someone like Shinji, already struggling with feelings of worthlessness, Asuka's presence was salt in wounds that had never healed. Yet, there were moments when cracks appeared in Asuka's facade. Times when she would fall asleep waiting for something, looking vulnerable rather than fierce. Moments when her desperate need for recognition became obvious, when her entire self-worth seemed tied to being the best pilot, the most useful, the most indispensable. She could not stand the idea of being average, of being replaceable, of being anything less than exceptional. The reasons for this pathological need for validation lay in her past. In childhood trauma, she refused to acknowledge even to herself. The battles continued. Israfel arrived, an angel with the ability to split into two separate entities that operated in perfect synchronization. Destroying one half was useless, they would simply regenerate. The only way to defeat Israfel was for two Evas to attack both halves simultaneously, requiring Unit 01 and Unit 02 to move in perfect coordination. This necessitated training. Days of it. Asuka and Shinji learning to move together, to anticipate each other's actions, to function as a single unit despite their clashing personalities. They lived together under strict regimen, practicing the same movements over and over to a musical beat that would help them synchronize. It was absurd and tedious and strangely intimate, this forced cooperation between two people who otherwise could barely stand each other. When Israfel returned after regenerating from its initial defeat, Asuka and Shinji executed their plan with precision. The two Evas moved in perfect mirror synchronization, dancing through the angel's attacks, striking simultaneously at both cores. The battle was won through cooperation, through the kind of connection that neither pilot was comfortable acknowledging afterwards. School life provided its own challenges. Asuka transferred into Shinji's class, immediately establishing herself as popular and academically superior. She flirted with boys, dismissed girls she deemed beneath her notice, and generally dominated social situations the way she dominated battles. Rei remained isolated, speaking to almost no one, existing in her own separate sphere. The three pilots represented three different responses to trauma and loneliness. Shinji withdrew, became passive, sought to avoid causing trouble or drawing attention. Rei had constructed a self that barely existed, a personality so minimal it was almost transparent, following orders because she had no framework for wanting anything else. Asuka built walls of aggression and superiority, creating a persona so large and loud it could drown out any vulnerability trying to surface. None of them were healthy. None of them were receiving proper psychological support for the tremendous burden placed on their shoulders. NERV had child soldiers fighting existential threats, and the organization's response to their mental well-being was essentially nothing. Misato tried, in her limited capacity, but she was dealing with her own unresolved trauma from Second Impact. Using alcohol to numb pain, she refused to confront directly. The angel Sandalphon was discovered in embryonic form inside an active volcano. NERV decided to capture it, to study an angel before it matured, believing this could provide valuable intelligence. Unit 02 descended into the magma in a specially designed heat-resistant configuration, with Asuka piloting the retrieval mission. The operation went catastrophically wrong when Sandalphon matured ahead of projections, transformed and attacked. Unit 02 was caught in the volcano with a rapidly evolving angel and limited power reserves. The heat was extreme even with the protective equipment. Asuka fought desperately, improvising tactics, using the progressive knife in close-quarters combat against an enemy that could swim through molten rock. She won, barely, exhausted and overheated by the time Unit 02 was extracted. It was a victory that cost her considerably, another battle that chipped away at the illusion that she was invincible. Not all angels attacked with physical force. Eruel, the 11th angel, was microscopic, a virus-like entity that infiltrated NERV's computer systems and began taking control of the entire facility. It spread through the Magi supercomputers, those three systems that ran NERV's operations, attempting to trigger a self-destruct sequence that would destroy headquarters and everyone inside. Ritsuko Akagi worked frantically to stop it, writing a counter-program that would attack Eruel at the microscopic level, essentially creating an evolution-based competition where her program would adapt faster than the angel could. She succeeded, barely, exhausted and shaken by how close they had come to total annihilation without ever deploying an EVA. Leliel appeared as a massive sphere floating above Tokyo 3, casting a shadow on the ground below. When Unit 01 approached to investigate, the ground beneath it opened up, revealing that the shadow was not a shadow at all, but the angel's true body, an inverted space-time anomaly. Unit 01 was pulled inside, trapped in a dimension where normal physics did not apply, slowly being dissolved by the Angel's internal sea of Dirac. Shinji was trapped inside the entry plug as the LCL began turning acidic, slowly being consumed. He faced the possibility of death alone in an impossible space, his mind fracturing under the isolation and terror. But Unit 01, protecting its pilot, protecting Yui's son, went berserk once again. The Eva broke free through sheer impossible force, tearing Leliel apart from the inside out, emerging covered in the Angel's blood, howling with a voice that was not quite machine and not quite human. Each battle took its toll. Each victory came at psychological cost. The pilots were children, being traumatized repeatedly, their mental states deteriorating, and NERV's response was to schedule more tests, run more scenarios, extract more performance data. They were weapons being optimized, not people being cared for. Relationships grew more complex and more strained. Shinji attempted, in his awkward way, to connect with his fellow pilots. With Rei, he made slow progress, tiny moments of understanding passing between them. She began to change, to show hints of emotion, to question things she had never questioned before. When Gendo cancelled a planned dinner with Rei, leaving her alone waiting in her apartment, Shinji found her there and offered to reschedule, to have dinner together some other time. It was a small kindness, but for Rei it was profound, evidence that someone besides Gendo Ikari cared whether she existed. With Asuka, things were far more volatile. She veered between mocking him and seeking his attention, pushing him away, and then being angry when he maintained distance. Her need for validation manifested in increasingly desperate ways. When her synchronization scores began to slip, when Shinji's scores started approaching and then exceeding hers, Asuka's entire sense of self came under threat. Being the best pilot was not simply pride for Asuka. It was her entire identity, her reason for existing, the only thing that made her valuable in her own eyes. If she was not the best, if Shinji could match or exceed her abilities, then what was she? The question terrified her more than any angel ever could. Toji Suzuhara was selected as the fourth child, the designated pilot for Unit 03. It was kept secret initially, but Toji confided in Shinji before the activation test. He was not enthusiastic about becoming a pilot, had seen what it did to Shinji, but NERV had offered to provide medical treatment for his younger sister in exchange for his service. He accepted for her sake, another child being manipulated by adults with agendas. The activation test for Unit 03 took place at a facility away from Tokyo 3. All the pilots were kept at NERV headquarters during the test as a safety precaution. They watched on monitors as Unit 03 was powered up, as the entry plug was inserted, as the synchronization test began. Everything seemed normal initially. Then the angel appeared. Bardiel, the 13th angel, had been waiting dormant inside Unit 03. When the Eva activated, Bardiel infected it, taking control, transforming the Eva into an angel-controlled weapon. Unit 03 went berserk, destroying the test facility, killing most of the personnel present. It began moving towards Tokyo 3, and NERV had no choice but to treat it as a hostile target. Shinji, Rei, and Asuka were deployed to intercept. They did not know initially that Unit 03 was piloted, that there was a human being inside. When they learned the truth, when they discovered that the infected Eva contained the fourth child, someone they might know, Shinji refused to fight. He could not bring himself to attack an Eva with a pilot inside, could not risk killing whoever was trapped in there. Gendo overrode Shinji's control. He activated the dummy plug system in Unit 01, cutting Shinji out of the neural connection and letting the automated system take over. Unit 01 moved with terrifying efficiency, utterly destroying Unit 03, crushing the entry plug, leaving the pilot inside crippled and barely alive. Shinji was forced to watch, helpless, as his Eva destroyed what might be a friend, commanded by his father who viewed acceptable losses as an operational reality. When Shinji learned that Toji had been the fourth child, that his friend was now hospitalized with permanent disabilities, something broke in him. He refused to pilot anymore, refused to cooperate with NERV, demanded to be released. Gendo agreed with cold indifference, had Shinji arrested and scheduled for removal from Tokyo 3. If the boy would not pilot willingly, then he was useless, and NERV had no use for useless things. But the next angel arrived before Shinji could be transported away. Zeruel, the 14th angel, was one of the most powerful entities yet encountered. It carved through Tokyo 3's defenses like they were paper. Rei piloted Unit 0 alone, trying desperately to stop it, but Zeruel was too strong, too fast. It destroyed Unit 0's arms, rendered the EVA inoperable, and continued its advance towards the geofront. Asuka launched in Unit 02 without authorization, determined to prove she was still capable, still useful. Her synchronization had been dropping for weeks, her mental state deteriorating, but she convinced herself she could win, that she had to win. Unit 02 engaged Zeruel in desperate combat, but Asuka's synchronization was too low. Her attacks were ineffective. The angel retaliated with overwhelming force, destroying Unit 02's head, impaling the EVA with its arm ribbons. Asuka experienced the pain through the neural connection, her mind fracturing under the assault. Unit 02 fell, defeated, and Zeruel continued its advance. It broke into the geofront, descended towards NERV headquarters, began cutting through the layers of armor protecting terminal dogma. Nothing could stop it. NERV's defenses were useless. The angel would reach Lilith, and third impact would begin. Shinji watched the battle from his cell, watched Rei fail, watched Asuka fall, watched the organization that had used him prove unable to function without him. He could have remained there, could have let them all face the consequences of treating him as expendable, but Shinji Ikari, for all his faults, could not stand by while people died when he had the power to help. He demanded to pilot Unit 01. They released him, loaded him into the entry plug, launched Unit 01 to face Zeruel alone. The angel had already breached NERV headquarters, was in the geofront's main chamber, meters away from its goal. Shinji engaged with fury born of grief and frustration, attacking with a ferocity he had never shown before. But Zeruel was too powerful. It destroyed Unit 01's arms with casual efficiency. It fired an energy blast at point-blank range that obliterated Unit 1's head, exposing the organic tissue beneath, destroying the EVA's primary optics. Shinji was blind, his EVA mutilated, facing an enemy he could not see and could not damage. He had failed. They had all failed. Then Unit 01 moved on its own once more. The EVA regenerated impossibly against all physical laws. Its arms regrew, its head reformed, not with mechanical armor, but with organic tissue, eyes glowing with unnatural light. Unit 01 had awakened, achieving a state called Berserk, but this was different from previous incidents. The EVA was functioning beyond its design parameters, beyond anything Ritsuko's data could explain. Unit 01 seized Zeruel with overwhelming strength, bit into the angel's core with regenerated jaws, consuming it, absorbing its AT field and its S2 engine, that perpetual energy source that made angels nearly godlike. The EVA fed on the angel until nothing remained, standing afterwards bathed in blood, transformed into something that was no longer quite an Evangelion, and not quite an angel, but something in between. Shinji was absorbed into Unit 01 during this process. His body dissolved into LCL, his soul pulled into the EVA's core, where his mother's soul resided. He experienced a kind of peace there, a place without pain or loneliness or responsibility. He spoke with Yui, or with something that might have been Yui's consciousness, and for a time he was content to remain there, dissolved, no longer existing as distinct individual. NERV worked frantically to retrieve him. Ritsuko developed a process to reverse the absorption, to pull Shinji's soul back out of Unit 01 and reconstruct his body. It took weeks. During that time, Unit 01 stood dormant in its cage, containing within it both mother and son, both souls intertwined in ways that defied understanding. When Shinji finally emerged, reconstructed from the LCL, his memories of the time inside Unit 01 were fragmentary and dreamlike. He remembered warmth, acceptance, a place where he did not have to be afraid anymore. Coming back to reality, to the world of pain and obligation, was traumatic in itself. Rei, meanwhile, had survived the battle with Zeruel, but Unit 00 had been destroyed. A new Unit 0 was under construction, But Rei herself was changing in ways that troubled her. She was experiencing emotions she did not understand, questioning things she had always accepted without thought. Why did she pilot? Why did she follow Gendo's orders? What did she want for herself, if anything? She visited Gendo's office one day and found his glasses, which he had left on his desk. She picked them up, looked at them, and suddenly understood something she had never articulated before. She was not the first Rei. There had been others before her. She was a copy, disposable, replaceable. The realization was profound and disturbing, even if she did not yet have the full context to understand what it meant. Asuka's mental state was collapsing entirely. The defeat by Zeruel had shattered her confidence. Her synchronization scores plummeted. She could barely operate Unit 02 anymore, her connection to the Eva deteriorating as her sense of self deteriorated. She stopped attending school, stopped eating properly, lay in bed staring at the ceiling, repeating to herself that she was nothing, that she had no value, that she should not exist if she could not be the best. Misato tried to help, but did not know how. She had no training in psychology, no framework for dealing with a child in crisis. She tried to be supportive, tried to give Asuka space, tried to find the right words, but everything she attempted seemed to make things worse. Asuka needed professional help, needed therapy and medication and time to heal. But NERV's priority was operational efficiency, not pilot well-being. The organization had larger concerns. Sealy was becoming impatient with Gendo's deviations from their scenario. The Dead Sea Scrolls had prophesied 15 angels and 14 had now been defeated. 1 remained. After that, Sealy intended to trigger third impact according to their plan, the Human Instrumentality Project that would merge all human souls into a single entity, ending individuality, ending conflict, ending the pain of existence by ending separate existence itself. Gendo had his own plan, one that diverged significantly from Sealer's vision. He needed Unit 01, needed Shinji to pilot it, needed all the pieces to be in place when the final angel arrived. Everything he had done, every manipulation, every sacrifice, was preparation for the moment when he could use third impact not to serve Seal's goals, but to achieve his own reunion with Yui. Deep in terminal dogma, Lilith waited on its cross. The Lance of Longinus had been removed to destroy an earlier angel, thrown into orbit where it remained embedded in the moon. Without the lance, Lilith could not be fully controlled. If an angel reached it now, if a merger occurred, third impact would be inevitable and uncontrollable. The final angel was coming. And when it arrived, it would be unlike any that had come before, because the 17th angel would arrive wearing a human face and speaking with a human voice. The 15th angel arrived without warning, appearing in orbit above Earth. Arael was unlike the previous angels in that it did not descend to attack directly. Instead, it remained in space, beyond the reach of conventional weapons, and attacked in a way that NERV had never encountered before. Arael attacked the mind. Asuka was deployed in Unit 02, the only pilot available at that moment. She launched with determination to prove herself, to show that she was still capable, still valuable. Unit 02 rose to meet the angel, weapons ready, Asuka's fragile confidence bolstered by the desperate need to succeed. Then Arael's attack began. It was not physical. The angel projected a beam of light directly into Asuka's mind, forcing her to confront every suppressed memory, every buried trauma, every painful truth she had spent years avoiding. Her consciousness was invaded, laid bare, dissected with surgical precision. She experienced her own past again as if for the first time, unable to look away, unable to defend herself against her own history. Asuka's mother had been a scientist working on the Evangelion project. She had undergone a contact experiment similar to Yui Ikari's, and like Yui, her consciousness had been absorbed into an Eva's core. But unlike Yui, part of Asuka's mother remained behind, a damaged fragment of a person, mentally broken by the incomplete absorption. Young Asuka had found her mother after the woman hanged herself, clutching a doll she believed was her daughter, unable to recognize the real Asuka standing in front of her. That trauma, that rejection, that fundamental wound had shaped everything Asuka became. She had vowed to never need anyone, to be so exceptional that no one could ignore her, to prove her worth through achievement so overwhelming that love would be unnecessary. She had built her entire personality as armor against the pain of not being recognized by her own mother, of being invisible to the one person whose attention she desperately craved. Ariel forced her to relive it all, the suicide, the funeral, the loneliness of a child trying to be an adult because no actual adults were taking care of her, the desperate pursuit of perfection as a substitute for love. Every failed attempt to connect with others, every relationship she had sabotaged, every vulnerability she had crushed in herself to maintain the illusion of strength. Inside Unit 02's entry plug, Asuka screamed. The psychological assault was more devastating than any physical attack could have been. Her mind fragmented under the weight of forced self-awareness, confronting truths she had no mechanisms to process. Her synchronization with Unit 02 collapsed entirely. The EVA shut down, and Asuka curled into a fetal position in the LCL, catatonic, broken. Rai launched in the new Unit 00, carrying a replica of the Lance of Longinus. She threw it with precision that defied physics, the lance traveling through the atmosphere and into space, piercing Ariel's core and destroying the Angel. But the damage to Asuka had been done. She was retrieved from Unit 02 and hospitalized, unresponsive, staring at nothing, trapped inside her own shattered psyche. The 16th Angel, Armisael, appeared shortly afterwards, a massive ring of light that attempted to merge directly with an Evangelion. It attacked Unit 00 first, beginning to fuse with Rei, attempting to understand humanity through connection with the pilot. Rei felt the Angel's loneliness, its desperate desire to understand these strange beings that kept destroying its kin. Angels, she realized, were not so different from humans in their fundamental isolation, their AT fields serving the same purpose as human psychological defenses, keeping distinct beings separate and alone. Armisael began merging with Unit 00 and spreading towards Unit 01. If it successfully infected both EVAs, the consequences would be catastrophic. Rei made a decision. She activated Unit 0's self-destruct mechanism, sacrificing herself to destroy the Angel before it could spread further. The explosion lit up Tokyo 3's sky, and Rei Ayanami died in fire and light, choosing her own end to protect Shinji. Except Rei did not stay dead. Within days, a new Rei appeared at NERV, physically identical, bearing the same name, but different in subtle ways. She had no memories of the previous Rei's experiences, no recollection of friendships or conversations. She was the third Rei, activated from the backup clones maintained in Terminal Dogma, another copy to replace the one that had been lost. Shinji visited her in the hospital and realized immediately that something was wrong. This Rei did not recognize him, did not remember their time together, the slow building of trust between them. She was a stranger wearing a familiar face, and the realization was devastating. Rei had been one of the few people Shinji felt any real connection with, and now even that relationship had been revealed as conditional, as replaceable. Misato took Shinji to Terminal Dogma, breaking protocol to show him the truth about NERV's deepest secrets. She had been investigating Gendo and Seely's true intentions, piecing together the real purpose behind the Evangelions and the Human Instrumentality Project. She showed Shinji the room where Rei's clones floated in LCL tanks, dozens of identical bodies waiting to be activated, each one a replacement for a disposable pilot. She showed him Lilith, that massive entity crucified in the depths, explaining that everything they had been told about Adam was a lie. This was what the Angels had been trying to reach, what third impact would be centered upon. Ritsuko Akagi was there as well, having reached her own breaking point with Gendo's manipulations. In a fit of rage and betrayal, she destroyed the Rei clones, flooding their tank and watching the bodies dissolve, killing all the backup copies except for the one currently active. The political situation was deteriorating rapidly. Seely had lost patience with Gendo's deviations from their scenario. They had anticipated that defeating all the Angels would give them control of the timing for third impact. But Gendo had been making moves that suggested he intended to trigger it himself, according to his own plan. SEAL began preparing for a direct assault on NERV, mobilizing military forces under the pretense of an emergency investigation. Into this mounting tension came Kaworu Nagisa. He was introduced as the fifth child, sent by Seele to replace Asuka as the pilot of Unit 02. He was Shinji's age, pale and silver-haired, with red eyes that seemed to see more than they should. There was something otherworldly about Kaworu, a quality that set him apart from normal humans, though the exact nature of that difference was not immediately apparent. Kaworu befriended Shinji almost immediately, with an ease and directness that Shinji found both comforting and unsettling. Where others were complicated, guarded, or burdened by their own trauma, Kaworu seemed somehow free of such concerns. He spoke to Shinji as an equal, expressed genuine affection without hesitation, told Shinji that he was worthy of love, that his existence had value. It was everything Shinji had desperately needed to hear and had never received from anyone else. For a brief time, Shinji felt something resembling happiness. Someone understood him, accepted him without judgment, cared for him without expecting anything in return. Kaworu would sit with him, talk about music, share comfortable silences. The connection felt profound, more genuine than any relationship Shinji had experienced before. But Kaworu Nagisa was not human. He was the 17th angel, Tabris, sent by Seele, but ultimately acting according to his own understanding of his purpose. He possessed an T-field like all angels, but also possessed something else: free will, consciousness, the ability to question his own nature and the scenario he existed within. Kaworu descended into terminal dogma one night, with Shinji following in Unit 01 to stop him. Kaworu had reached the chamber where Lilith was crucified, intending to merge with what he believed was Adam, to trigger third impact and return the earth to the angels. But when he saw Lilith, when he recognized what it truly was, he understood that the scenario had been different from what anyone expected. He stopped, turned to face Shinji in Unit 01. Explained that he could not go through with third impact because it would mean the end of humanity, and he had come to value human existence through knowing Shinji. He could not destroy the beings that had created someone capable of showing him kindness, of treating him as something more than just a threat to be eliminated. Kaworu asked Shinji to kill him. It was the only way to stop third impact, to prevent his own angel nature from overwhelming his will. He floated there, waiting, trusting Shinji to do what was necessary. Unit 01 reached out, grasped Kaworu in its massive hand. Shinji hesitated, paralyzed by the choice before him. This was the only person who had ever truly understood him, who had offered unconditional affection, and now he was being asked to kill him. But if he did not, humanity would end. Everyone would die. The weight of that responsibility, that impossible choice, crushed down on Shinji's already damaged psyche. Unit 01's hand closed. Kaworu's body ruptured, blood spilling across Unit 01's palm. The 17th angel died, and with him died any hope Shinji had of being loved, of being understood, of mattering to someone. The psychological impact was catastrophic. Shinji had been forced to kill the one person who made him feel valued, with his own hands, watching the life drain away. The trauma added to accumulated months of horror, of being used, of fighting and killing, of losing everyone who showed him any kindness. Something fundamental broke in Shinji Ikari that day. A severance of whatever fragile connection he had maintained with the will to live. He withdrew completely. Stopped speaking to anyone. Sat in silence, replaying Kaworu's death in his mind, unable to process the guilt and loss. Misato tried to reach him, but he was unreachable, locked inside his own pain. The world continued around him, Seele's preparations advancing, NERV's internal tensions mounting, but Shinji existed separate from all of it, hollowed out and numb. What followed Kaworu's death was a descent into psychological examination that defied conventional narrative structure. Episodes 25 and 26 of the television series abandoned external action entirely, diving instead into the internal landscape of the characters' minds. These episodes took place in a space that was neither physical reality nor simple dream, but something else, a psychological realm where questions of identity, self-worth, and existence could be confronted directly. Shinji found himself in this space, though he did not understand how he had arrived there or what it meant. Voices spoke to him, sometimes his own, sometimes belonging to others. They asked questions. Who are you? What defines you? Why do you exist? The questions were fundamental, stripping away all pretense and forcing confrontation with core identity. Shinji's sense of self had always been fragile, built on shaky foundations. He defined himself primarily through others' perceptions. He was his father's disappointing son. He was the EVA pilot who reluctantly fought. He was the boy who ran away. These external definitions gave him shape, but they were not truly him, not a genuine sense of self that could exist independent of others' judgments. The psychological examination forced him to confront this. If everyone else disappeared, if there were no external perceptions to define him, would he still exist? The question was terrifying because Shinji had no confident answer. His sense of self was so dependent on external validation that imagining himself in isolation, with no one to perceive him, felt like imagining his own non-existence. Alternative realities were presented. Versions of his life where different choices had been made. A world where he was an ordinary student, where there were no Evangelions, where his relationships with others were healthy and uncomplicated. These alternatives seemed preferable, easier, but they were also revealed as fantasies, wish fulfillment, rather than genuine possibilities. Retreating into fantasy was just another form of running away, avoiding the difficulty of actual existence by imagining easier circumstances. The examination explored the concept of AT fields, not just as physical barriers used by angels and Evangelions, but as psychological metaphor. Every human possessed an AT field of sorts, a barrier that kept their consciousness distinct and separate from others. These barriers were necessary for individuality to exist, but they also created loneliness, isolation, the fundamental human condition of being trapped within one's own subjective experience, unable to truly share consciousness with another. Pain came from these barriers, the impossibility of perfect understanding between people, the reality that no matter how close two people became, they remained fundamentally separate, unable to truly merge their consciousness, unable to escape the isolation of individual existence. This separateness created all the pain of relationships, misunderstandings, rejections, the inability to convey what one truly felt or meant. But without these barriers, without this separateness, there could be no relationships at all. If all consciousness merged into one unified entity, there would be no distinct individuals to form connections. Love required separateness, required the existence of another who was distinct and different. Eliminating the pain of separation meant eliminating the possibility of connection, of love, of any relationship that made existence worthwhile. Shinji was presented with a choice, though not in clear terms. Accept the separateness that came with individual existence. Accept the pain and loneliness that accompanied being a distinct self. Accept that he would never be perfectly understood and could never perfectly understand others. Or reject this, seek to dissolve the boundaries, merge with everyone else, and eliminate the separateness that caused so much suffering. The examination showed him what others thought of him, their perceptions, their judgments, the ways they saw him that differed from how he saw himself. His father viewed him as a necessary tool, nothing more. Misato saw him as someone who needed protection and guidance. Rei was beginning to see him as the first person who treated her as something more than a doll. Asuka saw him as weak, as everything she feared becoming. These perceptions were all partial, all incomplete. None of them captured who Shinji truly was, because they were filtered through others' own perspectives, their own needs and fears and limitations. But this incompleteness was inevitable. No one could perfectly understand another person. The best that could be achieved was partial understanding, fragments of truth mixed with projection and misinterpretation. Shinji had to choose whether to accept this, to accept being seen imperfectly, to accept that he would hurt and be hurt by others, that relationships would always be incomplete and imperfect. The alternative was to reject relationships entirely, to seek isolation or dissolution, to escape the pain by eliminating the possibility of connection. The psychological space presented scenarios, possibilities, questions without clear answers. It explored Shinji's relationships with others, showing how much of his identity was bound up in these connections, despite their imperfection. His need for his father's approval, even though that approval would never come in the form he wanted. His complicated feelings toward Rei and Asuka, attraction mixed with fear and inadequacy. His friendship with Toji and Kensuke, normal relationships rendered abnormal by the gulf between his experiences and theirs. The examination was exhausting, relentless, stripping away every defense and pretense. It forced confrontation with truths that were easier left unexamined. That Shinji's entire sense of self was constructed from others' perceptions. That he had no confident answer to the question of who he was if removed from all social context. That his fear of rejection was so profound it prevented him from truly attempting connection. That he simultaneously craved and feared intimacy, wanting to be known while terrified of being truly seen. Other characters underwent similar psychological examinations. Misato confronted her own patterns, recognizing how she used her cheerful persona to mask deep trauma, how her relationship choices recreated her issues with her father, how she had never truly processed Second Impact or her father's death. She saw herself clearly, perhaps for the first time, and the recognition was painful but necessary. Asuka's examination stripped away her usual defenses. Memories surfaced without warning, fragmented and relentless, pressing in from every direction. Voices echoed where reassurance should have been, doubts replacing confidence, images of failure intruding on every attempt at control. She tried to fight it, to assert the version of herself she believed in, but the process offered no resistance to push against. It simply showed her what remained when strength and certainty fell away, leaving her alone with fears she had never learned how to face. Rei's examination focused on questions of identity and agency. What did it mean to be a copy, a manufactured being created for a specific purpose? Could such a being have genuine desires, genuine selfhood, or was she simply executing programming? The questions had no clear answers, but asking them was itself significant. Evidence that Rei was developing something beyond her original parameters, that consciousness and choice could emerge even in beings created rather than born. The psychological examination concluded with a scene that defied logical explanation. Shinji stood before an assembly of shadowy figures, representations perhaps of humanity in general, or of the various forces judging him throughout his life. They congratulated him, told him he had done well, offered the acceptance and recognition he had desperately sought. "Congratulations," they said, and the word repeated, echoing from multiple voices. It was unclear what exactly was being congratulated. His survival? His choice to continue existing? His simple act of confronting these questions about his identity and self-worth? The ambiguity was intentional, leaving viewers to interpret what had actually occurred in these final 2 episodes. Some saw these episodes as an artistic choice, a deliberate move away from conventional narrative resolution towards psychological exploration. Others saw them as the result of production constraints, a necessary response to budget and time limitations that prevented a more traditional ending. Both interpretations had validity, and the episodes themselves refused to provide clear answers about what was meant to be taken literally versus metaphorically. What was clear was that these episodes represented Shinji's internal journey, his attempt to answer fundamental questions about existence and self-worth that had plagued him throughout the series. The congratulations at the end suggested some form of resolution, some acceptance of himself and his existence, despite all its pain and imperfection. Whether this represented genuine psychological growth or simply exhausted acceptance remained ambiguous. The television series ended there, with Shinji apparently having reached some form of understanding with himself, some acceptance of existence, despite its difficulties. But this ending left many questions unanswered about the external events. What happened to the other pilots? To NERV? To Seely's plans? The psychological resolution offered no insight into these practical matters, focusing entirely on internal states rather than external circumstances. This is where the end of Evangelion film provided an alternative conclusion, showing the external events that the television ending had ignored, depicting what physically happened during Third Impact, while the characters underwent their psychological examinations. The two endings were not contradictory, but complementary, showing internal and external aspects of the same events from different perspectives. Seele's patience had ended. With all 17 angels defeated, with Gendo making increasingly obvious moves towards implementing his own version of instrumentality, the shadowy organization decided that direct action was required. They mobilized the Japanese Strategic Self-Defense Force, thousands of soldiers under the guise of an emergency investigation into NERV's activities. But this was not an investigation. It was an invasion. The attack came at dawn. Military forces surrounded the Geofront, cut off all external communications, and began their assault on NERV headquarters. Soldiers flooded into the facility, overwhelming the security forces, killing anyone who resisted. This was not a battle against angels. This was humans killing humans, soldiers following orders to eliminate an organization that had strayed too far from Seele's control. Misato moved through the chaos, trying to reach Shinji, knowing that Unit 01 was the key to everything, that whatever happened next would center on that EVA and its pilot. She found him in his quarters, catatonic, and began forcibly moving him towards the EVA cages, through corridors filled with gunfire and smoke. She was wounded during the process, shot protecting Shinji from soldiers, blood staining her jacket as she continued pushing him forward. They reached the EVA cages through side passages. Misato was dying, bleeding out from the gunshot, but she kept moving, driven by determination to at least get Shinji to Unit 01 before she collapsed. She tried to give him encouragement, tried to explain why he needed to pilot one more time, tried to give him reasons to live. Then she kissed him, a gesture of affection that was simultaneously maternal and something else, a final gift to a broken child who had been given so little affection in his life. She pushed him into the lift leading to Unit 01, told him to pilot. The doors closed. Misato Katsuragi collapsed in the corridor outside, alone, bleeding out, knowing she had done what she could. She died there, another casualty of Seele's assault, another person sacrificed to the machinery of apocalypse. Elsewhere in NERV headquarters, Ritsuko Akagi was being escorted by soldiers to Seele's representatives. Gendo was with her, having been captured during the initial assault. Seele intended to extract information, to gain control of NERV systems, and proceed with their version of instrumentality. But Ritsuko had already sabotaged key systems, had already ensured that Seele could not simply take over the organization and proceed with their plan. She was shot by Seele's agents before she could be interrogated. Ritsuko died in front of Gendo, surprised and betrayed one final time, killed because she knew too much and had proven unreliable. The man she had loved stood by and watched, offering nothing, his face showing no emotion as she collapsed. Gendo was subsequently captured, his attempt to reach Terminal Dogma prevented by soldiers who dragged him away to face Seele's judgment. Shinji reached Unit 01's cage, still numb, still broken. He climbed into the entry plug mechanically, going through the motions because it was what Misato had told him to do, because following orders was easier than making decisions. The EVA activated, neural connections established, but Shinji's synchronization was nearly non-existent. He could not pilot effectively, could barely move the EVA. His trauma was too great, his will to act completely severed. Unit 01 was sealed and submerged in bakelite, a hardening resin deployed to prevent the EVA from being activated. Seele had anticipated this possibility, had planned for the contingency where Shinji would be unable or unwilling to pilot. They had brought their own weapons. 9 mass-production Evangelions, white units with permanent smiles, built according to specifications that differed significantly from NERV's models. These EVAs had S2 engines, making them nearly indestructible, capable of sustained operation without external power. And they had a pilot. Asuka Langley Soryu had awakened from her catatonic state, pulled back from the brink by desperate need and something else. Something she had finally understood. Her mother's soul was in Unit 02. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The soul absorbed during that failed contact experiment, the consciousness that should have been lost, had been inside Unit 02 all along. Her mother had been watching over her during every battle, protecting her, loving her in the only way she still could. Asuka's synchronization with Unit 02 skyrocketed. She achieved levels that rose dramatically in a way no one expected, her consciousness merging almost completely with her mother's. The two of them finally united. Unit 02 broke free from its restraints, rose from the bottom of the lake where it had been submerged, and emerged, ready to fight. The battle between Unit 02 and the 9 mass-production EVAs was brutal and visceral. Asuka fought with ferocity born of years of repressed rage, finally understanding her purpose, finally feeling her mother's presence. She tore through the white EVAs with savage efficiency, dismembering them, destroying them, screaming defiance against Seal and everything that had tried to break her. For a time, she was winning. The mass production units fell one after another, torn apart by Unit 02's progressive weapons. Asuka was unstoppable, connected to her mother, fighting not just for survival but for vindication, for proof that she mattered, that she was not worthless or disposable. But the mass production EVAs could regenerate. They possessed S2 engines, perpetual energy sources that allowed them to rebuild themselves no matter how thoroughly they were destroyed. They rose again, sprouted wings, took to the air. Unit 02's power ran out. The internal battery depleted. The EVA froze, and Asuka was helpless as the 9 white units descended upon her. They tore Unit 02 apart, ripped off its arms, impaled it with replicas of the Lance of Longinus, tore into the EVA's organic body with their teeth, feeding on it like carrion birds. Asuka felt every injury through the neural connection, her synchronization still high, experiencing the dismemberment of Unit 02 as if it were happening to her own body. She screamed in agony, her mind fracturing under the assault, until finally the mass-production EVAs found Unit 02's entry plug and crushed it, silencing her screams forever. The destruction of Unit 02 and Asuka's death triggered something in Shinji. He had been paralyzed, unresponsive, but watching Asuka die, hearing her screams, broke through the numbness. He screamed for Unit 01 to move, begged it to help her, and the EVA responded. The Bakelite shattered. Unit 01 rose, breaking free from its containment through sheer force of will and maternal protection, Yui's soul once again moving to protect her son and those he cared about. But it was too late to save Asuka. Unit 01 emerged to find Unit 02 already destroyed, the mass-production EVAs circling above like vultures. The EVA system was in an unprecedented state, having broken free without authorization, operating beyond all safety parameters. Unit 01 was no longer a weapon being controlled. It was an entity acting according to its own will, and it was angry. The mass-production EVAs attacked. Unit 01 fought back with devastating efficiency, but they were too numerous, too resilient. They drove their lances into Unit 01, crucifying it, holding it immobile. The Lance of Longinus returned from the moon, called by Sealy, and impaled Unit 1 through the chest, pinning it in place. Everything seemed to be proceeding according to Seal's scenario. They would use Unit 01 and Lilith to trigger third impact under their control, implementing human instrumentality as they had always intended. But they had forgotten about Rei. The third Rei, who possessed no memories of the previous Rei's experiences, but had inherited something else, the capacity to choose, to act according to her own will rather than simply following orders. Rei refused Seal's control. She descended into terminal dogma, merged with Lilith, and began third impact, not according to Sealy's plan, but according to her own understanding. Giant Rei rose from the geofront, massive beyond comprehension, cradling Unit 01 in her hands. She released Shinji from the entry plug, pulled his consciousness into the space where instrumentality would be decided. Third impact had begun, and now every human on Earth would face the dissolution of their AT fields, the merging of all souls into a single unified entity. Across the planet, people began to dissolve. Their bodies transformed into LCL, that primordial fluid from which all life had emerged. A giant ray appeared beside each person as they transformed, guiding them into the collective unconscious, into the space where individual identity would cease and all souls would merge into one. Military forces, civilians, everyone, regardless of location or circumstance, experienced the same dissolution. Inside the space of instrumentality, Shinji confronted the fundamental question of existence. Without AT fields, without the barriers that kept souls distinct and separate, all humans would merge into a single entity. There would be no more loneliness, no more pain of separation, no more conflict or misunderstanding. But there would also be no more individuals, no more distinct consciousnesses, no more possibility of genuine connection between separate beings. Shinji experienced instrumentality as a collective consciousness, feeling everyone's thoughts and emotions simultaneously. He understood that he was not unique in his pain, that everyone struggled with loneliness and fear, that the human condition was fundamentally one of isolation, punctuated by desperate attempts at connection. He saw his own life from outside, recognized his patterns of behavior, his self-destructive tendencies, his inability to accept affection when it was offered. He wanted to die, wanted to stop existing. The pain of consciousness was too much, the weight of his guilt too heavy. In instrumentality, he could dissolve, become part of the collective, cease to exist as an individual. It seemed like the only escape from suffering. But dissolution was not the same as death. It was erasure, the elimination of the possibility of ever experiencing anything again, good or bad. And while life was painful, while connection with others risked hurt and rejection, the alternative was non-existence, was giving up any chance of things ever being different or better. Instrumentality showed Shinji alternative realities, other versions of his life where different choices had been made, worlds where he was happy, where his relationships were healthy, where he had not been traumatized by piloting the Eva. But these were fantasies, not realities, and retreating into fantasy was just another form of running away. The question came down to choice. Accept instrumentality, merge with all other souls, eliminate individual existence and all the pain that came with it, or reject instrumentality, maintain the AT fields that kept souls separate, accept the loneliness and possibility of hurt that came with being a distinct individual, but also preserve the possibility of genuine connection, of growth, of change. Shinji chose to reject instrumentality. He chose to remain himself, distinct and separate, accepting the risk of pain for the possibility of something more. The decision was not heroic or triumphant. It was simply the choice to continue existing, to face whatever came, rather than dissolving into nothingness. The giant ray began to collapse. The merged souls separated back into individuals, given form once more. Across the world, humanity was reformed, each person regaining their individual consciousness, their AT fields restored. But most chose to remain in instrumentality, found the comfort of collective consciousness preferable to the pain of separation. Only those who chose individuality, who accepted the risk of loneliness, would return to physical form. The world that remained was devastated. An ocean of LCL covered much of the planet, the dissolved bodies of billions who had chosen to remain merged. The sky was red. The mass-production Evas stood crucified and motionless, their purpose fulfilled. The remains of Unit 02 lay dismembered and still. And on a beach of LCL, Shinji Ikari regained physical form, alone in a world that had ended. He was not alone for long. Asuka emerged from the LCL as well, reformed, her consciousness having chosen to return to individual existence despite everything. She lay on the beach beside Shinji, both of them gasping, adjusting to having bodies again, to being separate beings after experiencing the temporary erasure of boundaries. Shinji reached out, placed his hands around Asuka's throat, and began to strangle her. Not out of hatred, not out of anger, but out of desperation to confirm that they were real, that this was not another fantasy or delusion. He needed to know that consequences existed again, that actions mattered, that this was genuine reality. Asuka raised her hand, touched his face with a tenderness that was completely unexpected from her. The gesture was gentle, accepting, an acknowledgement of his pain and fear. Shinji released her throat and collapsed beside her, crying. Asuka lay beside him, staring at the red sky, and spoke a single phrase loaded with exhaustion and resignation. How disgusting. It was unclear what she meant. Perhaps she was referring to Shinji, to herself, to the situation they found themselves in, or to existence itself. But the words served as a final statement on the human condition they had both chosen to return to. Flawed, painful, messy, and yet somehow preferable to the alternative of not existing at all. The world they had known was gone. Most of humanity had chosen to remain in instrumentality. The Evangelions were destroyed. NERV and Sela had both collapsed, but life persisted. Two damaged children on a beach, facing an uncertain future in a world that had been fundamentally transformed, choosing moment by moment to continue existing despite everything. This was not a happy ending. There was no triumph, no reward for suffering, no promise that things would improve. But it was an ending that acknowledged the possibility of choice, of change, of the potential for something different. Shinji and Asuka had rejected the comfort of dissolution for the harder path of remaining distinct individuals, accepting all the pain and possibility that came with that choice. The story of Neon Genesis Evangelion is ultimately about loneliness, about the difficulty of human connection, about the barriers we construct to protect ourselves that simultaneously isolate us from others. The AT field serves as metaphor for the psychological defenses that keep us safe, but also keep us alone. The angels represent external threats, but the real conflicts in the story are internal, the battles each character fights with their own trauma, their own inability to accept themselves or connect with others. Shinji Ikari is not a hero in any traditional sense. He does not grow into confidence or strength. He remains damaged and uncertain throughout, choosing to act not out of conviction, but out of guilt, obligation, and desperate need to avoid causing others pain. His rejection of instrumentality is not triumphant self-actualization, but simply the choice to keep existing despite everything, to accept the burden of consciousness and individuality. Rei Ayanami's arc is about discovering selfhood, about learning that she exists as something more than just a tool for others to use. Her choice to act according to her own will during Third Impact, to reject Sele's control, represents the emergence of genuine agency from someone who had been denied the concept of having desires or wants of her own. Asuka Langley Soryu's story is about the desperate pursuit of validation, about building an identity based on achievement and superiority to mask fundamental wounds that never healed. Her breakdown, her forced confrontation with her own trauma, and her eventual understanding of her mother's presence in Unit 02 all represent the collapse of false structures and the painful emergence of genuine self-awareness. The adult characters serve as cautionary examples of what happens when trauma remains unprocessed. Misato masks her pain with forced cheerfulness and alcohol, trying to function despite never healing from Second Impact. Gendo becomes so consumed by his singular goal of reuniting with Yui that he sacrifices everything else, including his own son, becoming a monster in pursuit of love. Ritsuko follows her mother's path, falling into the same pattern of loving someone who views her as disposable, recognizing the cycle but unable to break it. Sele represents institutional power, pursuing utopian visions, without regard for individual autonomy or consent. Their human instrumentality project would eliminate suffering by eliminating individuality, solving the problem of human loneliness by destroying the concept of distinct beings. It is totalitarian in its scope, offering peace through the erasure of everything that makes humans human. The Evangelions themselves embody the horror of using children as weapons, of sacrificing the young to protect a world that has already failed them. The pilots are traumatized repeatedly, given no support, treated as expendable components in a system that values operational efficiency over human well-being. The fact that the Evas contain human souls, that they are mothers protecting their children, adds layers of tragedy to every battle. Third Impact serves as apocalypse and rebirth, the end of one world and the potential beginning of another. It offers escape from suffering through dissolution, through giving up individual existence for the comfort of collective consciousness. The rejection of this offer, the choice to remain separate despite the pain that comes with it, represents not optimism about human nature, but simply acknowledgement that existence, however painful, contains possibilities that non-existence does not. The final image of Shinji and Asuka on a beach in a devastated world is deliberately ambiguous. They have survived, they have chosen to exist, but they are still damaged, still carrying their trauma, still uncertain about the future. The world has not been saved in any meaningful sense. Most of humanity is gone. The structures of society have collapsed. What remains is simply two people alone together, facing forward, because there is no other direction to face. Neon Genesis Evangelion offers no easy answers about how to deal with trauma, loneliness, or the difficulty of human connection. It does not promise that things will get better or that suffering has purpose. What it offers instead is a brutally honest exploration of what it means to exist as a damaged person in a world that offers little comfort, choosing moment by moment to continue despite having every reason to give up. The story asks whether existence itself is worthwhile when it comes with so much pain. Whether connection with others is possible when everyone is trapped behind their own IT fields, their own psychological defenses. Whether there is meaning in suffering, or if we simply endure it because the alternative is worse. The answers it provides are uncomfortable, uncertain, but honest about the difficulty of being human. In choosing to end the story, not with triumphant victory, but with exhausted survival, Evangelion acknowledges that life is not a narrative arc that resolves cleanly. People remain damaged, trauma persists, healing is not guaranteed. But the choice to continue, to exist, to face another day despite everything, is itself a form of courage, even when it does not feel heroic. This has been the story of Neon Genesis Evangelion, a tale of isolation and apocalypse, of children forced to fight battles they should never have faced, of adults pursuing goals that destroyed everyone around them, of a world that ended, and two people who chose to exist in what remained. May you find peace in your own existence, whatever form that takes, and may you rest well in the knowledge that choosing to face tomorrow is enough.